The year is 1800. A storm is brewing in antebellum America. A storm that will change life forever. It isn't a tornado or a hurricane, but something much more powerful. It's the Second Great Awakening. Times were changing, women were becoming more important in society, education and sciences were developing and becoming more advanced and accessible. Things would be different from here on out. But was the country ready? As I said before, all of the reforms in America were catalyzed by the Second Great Awakening. But what was the Second Great Awakening? Let's venture to the year 1850. At this time, church still played a huge role in American society. Around three-fourths of the 23 million Americans attended church with regularity, but church was much different than it had been in preceding centuries in America. People were moving away from the strict Calvinist ways and into more rational liberal ways. A form of Christianity known as deism was gaining popularity. Remember Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense? He changed America once by creating anti-British sentiment, and now he was transforming American culture again. His book, The Age of Reason, written in 1794, preached anti-clericalism and even stated that all churches were set up to terrify and enslave mankind and monopolize power and profit. Although most people were not as anti-church as Paine, many people got on board with the religion based on reason. Thus, Unitarianism was born. Unitarians believe in unity of faith and ways of life, a general concept of togetherness, acceptance of diversity, and that there are many ways to heaven. They did not believe in the divinity of Jesus, although he was a fabulous person. They believed that God existed in only one person, that being God. The Unitarians also believed in the possibility of salvation through good works and in the power of free will. Basically, if you're a good human being, you will be rewarded in the afterlife. Although denying the deity of Jesus, Unitarians stress the essential goodness of human nature rather than its vileness. They proclaimed their belief in free will and the possibility of salvation through good works. They pictured God not as a stern creator, but as a loving father. Embraced by many leading thinkers, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Unitarian movement appealed mostly to intellectuals whose rationalism and optimism contrasted sharply with the hellfire doctrines of Calvinism, especially predestination and human depravity. Although there were many supporters of the Unitarian faith, a huge reaction to the increasing liberalism of religion was bound to happen, and it did. This was the Second Great Awakening. Religious revivals sprang up all over the country, mainly in the South. New sects and churches were popping up like wildflowers. Perhaps the branches of Christianity that benefited from this religious rebirth the most were the Methodists and the Baptists. Both sects stressed personal conversion, contrary to predestination, a relatively democratic control of church affairs, and rousing emotionalism. Mormonism was also created. The founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church, was Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith claimed to have been given 2 gold tablets by an angel. The Mormons became a group that could sway the elections, as they all voted together for the same people. After Smith was murdered in 1844, the Mormons freaked out. What would they do without their leader? Luckily, Brigham Young stepped into the picture. During 1846 and 1847, he packed up the Mormons and they moved westward to Utah. They transformed Utah from a desert land to a successful, prosperous frontier society. Utah had all of the qualifications to become a state, but did not become an official part of America until 1896. Why? Many Mormons practiced polygamy. Western New York, where many descendants of New England Puritans had settled, was so blistered by sermonizers preaching hellfire and damnation that it became to be known as the Burned-Over District. Millerites, or Adventists, who mustered several 100,000 adherents, rose from the superheated soil of the burned-over region in the 1830s. Named after the eloquent and commanding William Miller, they interpreted the Bible to mean that Christ would return to Earth on October 22nd, 1844. Donning their go-to meeting clothes, they gathered in prayerful assemblies to greet their Redeemer. The failure of Jesus to descend on schedule dampened but did not destroy the movement.
Pennsylvanians would work in sheds and basement workshops, developing anything from typewriters to telescope lenses. These amateur inventors very often failed to market their creations, as early Americans were more interested in practical gadgets than in pure science. Medicine was still primitive in the 19th century in America, despite a steady increase in available medical education. Smallpox plagues were still dreaded, and the yellow fever epidemic of 1793 in Philadelphia took several thousand lives. Self-prescribed medicines were common, and bleeding remained a standard cure. Among home remedies was the rubbing of tumors with dead toads. Founded in no scientific study but only in superstitious stories of previous experiences, the use of medicine by doctors was often harmful. Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, a doctor at Harvard Medical School, declared in 1860 that if the medicines as then employed were thrown into the sea, humans would be better off and the fish worse off. As you can imagine, surgical operations were less than comfortable. Victims of surgical operations were ordinarily tied down with a stiff drink of whiskey, their only source of painkillers. The surgeon then sawed or cut with breakneck speed in order for the procedure to be completed as quickly as possible, tuning out piercing shrieks of the patient. A priceless success arrived in 1840 when several American doctors and dentists successfully employed laughing gas as an anesthetic during an operation. At the beginning of the 19th century, the educational system was disorganized and discriminatory. Young children would learn reading, writing, spelling, and arithmetic. However, as they grew older, girls became limited to courses in composition, music, and art. These were the subjects that were considered acceptable for women to know and study. Boys, on the other hand, would continue on to study literature, history, language, and potentially law or ministry, provided they came from a privileged family. Upon the arrival of the Second Great Awakening, various men and women took a bold step forward, intent on the improvement of the education system. One of these men was Horace Mann. Horace Mann was best known for his contributions to the educational reform of the 1800s. Mann believed that the most effective way of guaranteeing that American citizens were principled and educated was free universal public education. He even developed his own 6 principles of education. 1. Citizens cannot maintain both ignorance and freedom. 2. This education should be paid for, controlled, and maintained by the public. 3. This education should be provided in schools that embrace children from varying backgrounds. 4. This education must be non-sectarian. 5. This education must be taught using tenets of a free society. And 6. This education must be provided by well-trained professional teachers. In a speech at Antioch College 2 months before he died, he left the students with the words, "I beseech you to treasure up in your hearts these my parting words. Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." Another famous contributor was Noah Webster. Noah Webster was a Yale graduate with a law degree when he discovered a need to update the American school system. Students were still using textbooks from England from before the American Revolution. Eager to help improve the education system, Webster wrote his own English textbook, A Grammatical Institute of the English Language, which went on to sell almost 100 million copies. He also helped to found Amherst College in Amherst, Massachusetts in the 1790s. In 1801, he began his quest to create the first American dictionary. Published in 1806, the book, A Compendious Dictionary of the English Language, provided definitions of around 37,000 words. His second dictionary, American Dictionary of the English Language, provided around 28,000 more definitions. The dictionaries were significant because they created clear differences between American and British language. He added additional words to them that did not appear in British dictionaries, and he altered the spelling of various words like color and music.
The early to mid-1800s was an important time for women. Women often took the place in society as stay-at-home moms, and were to be seen, not heard. The cult of domesticity was the belief that women should stay home and take care of domestic matters, because they were seen as frail and weak, while the men went out to work to make money and provide for families. As this crucial age came upon us, many courageous women stood up to make a difference.
Being a woman often prevented her from being listened to. This and her acquaintanceship with Elizabeth Cady Stanton led her to join the ever-growing women's rights movement. She then dedicated her life to the suffrage for women. She created a weekly paper called The Revolution and co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Association. She also campaigned for the abolition of slavery, the rights for women to own property and retain their earnings, and advocated women labor organizations.
One courageous woman who also stretched the boundaries was Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts. She was brought up in a Quaker family with long activist traditions. In the late 1840s, her family moved to a farm in Rochester, New York. Here, her family became very involved in the fight to end slavery, and her farm became a meeting place for famous abolitionists like Frederick Douglass. In 1900, she convinced the University of Rochester to allow women in. It wasn't until 1920, 14 years after her death, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed, giving all adult women the right to vote. Another crucial woman to the time period was Elizabeth Blackwell. Elizabeth Blackwell was born February 3, 1821, and she moved to the United States when she was 11 years old. She was the first woman to graduate from medical school in the United States. Many people opposed the fact that she was a woman getting a degree, and they discouraged her from pursuing it. By the end of her life, she became one of the leading public health activists of her time. In the 1860s, she went back to England and opened a medical school for women. She was an instrumental figure that helped ensure the education of women. Oberlin College, a college in Ohio, shook things up by opening its doors to women for the first time in 1837. This was the first time ever that the doors were open to females. This college was the first in the world to do something like this, and it was a big step in the fight for women's rights. One of the women who went there was Lucy Stone.
Lucy Stone was an advocate for women's rights and the abolition of slavery. Dissatisfied with the lack of opportunities for women in America's education system, Stone became dedicated to the women's rights movement. She also decided not to take the surname of her counterpart upon marriage to him. Though this might seem minor in the fight for equality, this wasn't a common occurrence at the time and showed her refusal to fall into the role that women were so used to playing. Defying those who preached that women could never be public speakers, Stone became an outspoken voice in the anti-slavery movement and women's rights cause. She later became president of the New Jersey Suffrage Association and helped found the American Equal Rights Association in 1866.